Chairman Cogliano,
Present.
Vice Chair Brown.
Here.
Secretary Treasurer Good,
Present.
Member Hughes. Here. Member Armstrong,
Here.
Member Knight.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on, item 2. Mayor Good, would you please lead us in the pledge of allegiance?
Please join me in pledging allegiance to our great republic and the flag that represents it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Allison, will you please handle item 3, please?
CYMPO complies with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and related non-discrimination statutes and regulations in all programs and activities. Members of the public may review the CYMPO Title VI plan and submit a self-identification survey by accessing the CYMPO website.
Thank you, ma'am. Item 4, call the public. This item is to provide an opportunity for presentation of comments by the public on subjects not on the agenda. Individuals wishing to address the board need not request permission in advance and are limited to 3 minutes. Clerk, has anyone made mention of wanting to speak? And if not, anyone at this time out in the public can let us know. It appears that there's anyone that wishes to speak. Anyone online? Solid.
No comments at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on, item 5, consideration of possible action to approve the June 15th, 2022 executive board regular meeting minutes. Mr. Gallegos, this one's yours.
If you have any questions or comments, we have the minutes in your packet. Let us know if you need to respond to them.
We have a motion from Chairman Brown. We have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Moving on, item 7, project update of Sundial Connected Design Concept Report and Environmental. I'm sorry. Well, you know, we can get back to 6. It's okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Gallegos, you're up on 6.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you very much. Just a couple announcements. We do have a couple special guests that are joining us today that I wanted to acknowledge. In particular, they're here for item number 8, the RTAC update and our transportation legislative priorities. But again, really would like to acknowledge Ken Bennett, candidate for Senate in this district. We really appreciate you being with us, Ken. Thank you so much. Also virtually, we have Representative Quan Nguyen, who is joining us virtually, and also candidate Representative Selena Bliss is also with us. So I genuinely appreciate you all accepting the invitation to join us, most especially for our legislative ask in just a few minutes. So thank you again for being here. Just to give you an update, we are moving forward with the State Route 69 Master Corridor Plan. It will come to you next month on your agenda for approval of consultant. As you know, we have the Sundial Connector well underway, which Lindsay will give an update in a moment, but there is a lot of interest in, again, more priority, more attention to State Route 69 and what can be done with the safety and capacity. So we are moving forward with that master corridor plan. With that said, Mr. Chair, happy to answer any questions or comments.
Anything from Mr. Gallegos? Now we're moving on to item 7. Project update of Sundial Connector Design Concept Report and Environmental Overview. Ms. Post, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. It's awesome. I made a presentation to accompany my update today. And since we have some guests in the audience that Mr. Gallegos just introduced, I'll first provide a very brief background of this project. Pardon me. References to this potential east-west corridor can be found starting about 25 years ago with the Prescott General Plan in 1997. It continues to be discussed in the various studies and plans you see here, including the 2013 Sundial Connector Corridor Study by the city of Prescott. In the year 2000, the East End terminus was built on SR 69 near Home Depot. And then in the year 2011, the west end terminus was built near Prescott Lakes Parkway, near the Humane Society. So those already exist and have been very visible to driving public and our visitors every time they come into our community. Ooh, that's a touchy one, so I'm gonna try something different. This slide shows a map of the study area with information on the segments of the corridor. This is a 3.5 mile corridor. There are development agreements in place that outline the responsibilities that the various developers have towards contribution of this corridor. But this slide does show the breakdown of land ownership. And as you've all likely heard, the open space agreement between Yavapai County, the city of Prescott, and the town of Prescott Valley is progressing, which impacts the conceptual design of the Sundog connector. This slide illustrates the goal.
Back to that map.
Sure.
Just for a second, I got a question. Bill. You guys just bought a bunch of acres. Is that north of Storm Ranch or is that Storm Ranch?
Well, it's the southern part of Storm Ranch.
Southern portion. That would be right about there.
It's a little farther out.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks for letting me illustrate that. So that's a really exciting piece that we're able to discuss as we share the information with the public about this conceptual design project. Our consulting partner is AECom, and one of their sub-consultants is Kimley Horn for various parts of this project. This slide illustrates the goal of this project and the scope of work being done by AECom. Because of the high visibility of this project, public involvement is about 1/4 of the scope of work and 1/4 of the budget for this. And so to that end, I want to show you where we are today. I've crossed out what's already happened. Currently, the team is working on still collecting and gathering existing and future conditions. But the biggest announcement for today is the public interactive open house. So that is was scheduled for August. It's we've found a date and just found space for it. So that is now set for September 7th. You have the newsletter in front of you, members of the board. And this is what just went out to lots of stakeholders, lots of members of the public who signed up for distribution. So we're using this to announce the open house as well as some direct mailing and social media posts with the help of Prescott and Prescott Valley staff. So the newsletter in front of you shows the open house. It's going to be an interactive open house. It's from 4 to 6 and it's come when you can and stay as long as you like. And the way that it'll work is AECom with the help of CYMPO and yesterday with the help of the stakeholder TAC committee, we discussed how this will flow. So there will be stations set up dedicated to various technical topics of this project where AECom staff, TAC members, and technical stakeholders will be standing by to provide information and answer questions that the public has. There's also going to be some interactive activities where the public can share their desires for if this were to move forward, what roadway features would they want to see, what's important to them. And so we're finalizing how the run of show will go, and the stakeholders will get that information as we get it so that they can prepare the information they want to share. But for example, CAFMA and Prescott Fire have agreed to come and share information about their concerns with response time, evacuation, and resilience and things like that. Does anybody have any questions about the open house or the Sundog connector at all?
The date.
Yes, September 7th from 4 to 6. And so we welcome you to come, but do know that the TAC members representing your municipalities have also agreed to come and be technical experts at that event.
So that's going to be inside the Aspire Sports facility that's taken over almost all of the Sears building at the I'm just on the east side of the mall.
Yeah.
So it's a substantial space, and I think it should be very easy for the public to be able to see all the exhibits.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely right. It is the Sears building. You can enter directly from the parking lot on the southeast corner where Gateway Boulevard and Lee Boulevard meet. And so that'll prevent the members of the public from having to go through the pickleball courts, which if they want to, they can. But it'll be easier and more accessible if you come in directly. So we'll have signage and a lot of staff on hand to help guide people through this event.
And Mr. Chair and Mayor Good's point, we went back and forth in finding an appropriate space. We look back at 2013 when Prescott did the study. There was about 200 people that attended a meeting related to this project. So we know that interest is high. We know there's a lot of comments to it. So again, we're doing the best we can to provide an adequate space that is accessible for all purposes. So we do hope this space will achieve that.
Do you have any other questions from this post? All right, thank you, ma'am. Moving on, item 8, review and discussion, possible action to approve the CYMPO RTAC 2023 transportation priorities with RTAC update. Mr. Gallegos,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So typically we have an update by Kevin, which we'll have that in just a moment, but we went ahead and combined this on the agenda for the purposes of our discussion to give a little bit of background and then allow Kevin to jump in here, and then we'll transition after Kevin's part into a discussion and action item that will you'll have our recommendation for the legislative transportation priorities. So with that said, if you go to the next slide, Allison, just a brief background about the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council, and I'm sure Kevin can chime in a moment more on this, but I went ahead and put the mission statement that you see up on the screen of RTAC, which is to protect and promote rural and small metropolitan transportation interests, as well as creating a stronger and more efficient rural transportation advocacy network in Arizona. Most especially for our invited guests, I did list the 10 MPOs and COGs that are in Greater Arizona that work with RTAC. Supervisor Brown is the representative for CYMPO on the RTAC board. I sit on the advisory committee. I'm currently the chairperson, which is the MPO COG directors. But basically what Supervisor Brown and myself do is there's a representative from each MPO and COG. It is a staff of one, and Kevin Adam, who will be up here in just a moment as the legislative liaison, but he works with all of us. If you go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit specific of what we asked this past year, what CYMPO was a part of with and through RTAC, is RTAC did pursue $50 million of one-time transportation funding in Greater Arizona. CYMPO would have received about $4 million among those 10 MPO and COGs, and that's based on population. As we all experienced, and Kevin gave updates, there were many twists and turns, but I went ahead and just gave the quick bottom line here. We went after 4 million. We ended up with about 6.1 million. Most especially want to express our appreciation to Representative Wynn, who's in the meeting virtually. We appreciate his efforts, Senate President Fan, her efforts, and Representative Burgess and all that they did to represent this region and be able to bring CYMPO region $6.1 million. Just as a reminder, I did give the breakdown of what this region received in this last legislative one-time ask. State Route 89A on-ramps project. Again, this is near the airport. It's at the intersection of State Route 89 and 89A. It's going eastbound to Prescott Valley. As we've all been on it, we know it gets congested. It's only one lane going on to State Route 89A. CYMPO has done the planning to add a second on-ramps lane. This project is estimated around $5 million. We were through the legislative ask. We're given $3 million. We had the other part until the night before, and then through, again, twists and turns and negotiations, we lost it, but I have been communicating with ADOT, and we may be able to pursue minor district funds in the next couple of years, again, to make that whole. The second project that we were able to add funding to is 1.5 million for the roundabout at 69 and 169 next to the Mortimer's farm there. And then finally, the State Route 69 preservation project, which was actually in addition to the previous year that Representative Wynn was able to get $4.7 million for preservation, and then was able to add to it due to inflation and other factors. So again, that takes us to what we were able to achieve this year. With that said, I'd like to go ahead and go to the next slide and invite Kevin Adam up, and he'll give a RTAC update. And then that will transition into our ask for this legislative year. So Kevin.
Everyone's good?
Everyone's good.
Okay. Well, thank you, Vinny, Mr. Chair, members, and I think it's probably good to just go back a little bit, particularly for the guests, and talk about sort of the rationale and why we pursued earmark legislation last year, because I want to make sure everybody is clear that we respect the programming processes that occur at the State Transportation Board level and at the COG and MPO level. We think that that is absolutely the best way to determine the best use of the available funds that are directed to the state highway system, as well as the local road networks. However, going back to pre-session last year, I think it was very clear that pursuing some sort of permanent revenue increase to HERF was not politically viable. But at the same time, we also knew that the legislature was going to be dealing with a very substantial balance, in that they had prioritized transportation, and there was a very, very strong likelihood that they would be directing a significant level of that, for lack of a better term, surplus revenue to the infrastructure. And so we came up with the concept of pursuing what I would call a compromise approach, or a hybrid, something between programming and earmarking, where we would have the transportation planning agencies from across greater Arizona vet and develop a list of priorities from each region. We would then provide that to the legislature and recommend and ask that they fund that list of projects. And I think we had mixed results with that effort. The legislature ended up directing close to $1 billion in one-time funding to the infrastructure. And I think that the effort that we put forward, the engagement that occurred with lawmakers on the budget and on transportation, that I think just the visibility and the acknowledgement of the need and the demands that were out there for it certainly contributed to that $1 billion level. However, at the same time, I think that ultimately we were disappointed in in how much deference was provided to the recommendations of the COGs and MPOs. And I don't think you'll ever get politics completely out of the earmarking process. Earmarking is a tool. It's used as leverage to garner the votes needed to pass the budget, and that's never going to go away entirely. And I think that clearly each member, while they have one vote, doesn't have equal clout as well. And I think just to state the obvious, if you're in the majority, you're going to have a lot more leverage and clout as far as getting projects from your district in that ultimate budget, which hasn't been a problem for your region, but has been in other parts of the state. And so while we will never get that completely out of the equation, we do think that we can do a better job in asking them to pay more attention to those projects that you recommend. When bills get introduced, and typically they'll go to the transportation committees. When one of the members gets up and to justify or make the case for their bill, they always do a really good job. They've done their homework as far as being able to describe the merits and the needs of that particular project. But where they trip up is that when they are asked, well, okay, your project sounds great, sounds like it's badly needed, but why should it move to the front of the funding line? Why is your project better than a project from Sholo or Sierra Vista? And that's something that they're never able to answer because they don't deal with programming. And that's exactly what occurs with programming, is that you look at the available revenues and you do a very extensive analysis that involves public participation in determining what is the best use of that funding that's available to our roads or highways. So we want to see if we can't make improvements there. And then secondly, last year, we had some members and one committee chair in particular who got hung up on the idea that only state projects belong in the state budget. And if you know revenue sharing and the dependence that local road networks have on HERF, that's, I don't think, an accurate rationale. If you're going to address the shortfalls that are out there, whether it be on the state or local system, if you're going to address that through earmarks, then local projects should be part of that equation. And I do believe that the majority of lawmakers agreed with that last year. But that's a point that we're going to have to, I think, push forward and hopefully be a little bit more successful on this year as well. So, there's going into next year, a lot of unanswered questions. There's going to be a tremendous amount of changeover in Phoenix. We know, right now the majorities are incredibly slim. I think most people who follow it, while you can't ever rule out a change in who will be in the majority, what I'm hearing is that in all likelihood, you'll see Republicans gain a couple of seats in both chambers. And then, of course, we've also got the governor going to have a new administration next year, and that will have a major impact on what the agenda is going forward. And even if we don't see a partisan change in control of either chamber, we do know that we're going to have a new speaker, a new president, and there'll be a trickle-down effect where we'll probably get quite a bit of change with who's the committee chairs and who's on which committees. So there's going to be tremendous change next year. That general election and the outcome of it will greatly determine what's politically viable. The other thing that is going to be a big factor is once again, we're going to have an extremely large cash carry forward balance to work with next year. When the preliminary numbers for the last fiscal year that ended in June, it appears that there's going to be close to 4.8 billion. That's, if you look at the state's history, we've never had over $1 billion in a year. So 4.8 roughly. So we know there's a good opportunity and likelihood that lawmakers will once again consider earmarking projects for transportation. So it is our intent to pursue legislation once again and to do a better job pushing for the recommendations of the COGS and NPOs, and then also for the inclusion of local projects if that's the recommendation from the COGS and NPOs. So that is where we are, and I'm very appreciative that that CYMPO is in the process of developing their priorities, and we'll be up and running and ready to go in January. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Adams?
Kevin, are you saying that the recently signed Inflation Increasing Act, the Reduction Act is going to be able to provide some additional major funding for the state?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe that's the case. Of course, we've got, we just passed the last reauthorization, 5-year reauthorization in November. And it did provide for a significant increase in funding levels, but those are fairly set and fairly insulated. So we are anticipating increases at least for the next 4 years that I think will be removed from this recent bill. So we are going to get a fairly sizable increase in the revenues from the federal level, but that was pretty much from what occurred last November with that IIJA that passed.
You get a chance to really look at the details of that act?
I have, and of course,
The new one.
the new one, no, I have not, as far as any direct impacts to the infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm just curious about that. So,
However, inflation, and not that legislation, but inflation in general, is an extreme concern to infrastructure construction, where we were looking at levels, 7-8% inflation, but if you look at construction, the construction cost index, it is far higher. It's over 30%, and at the same time, we're seeing labor scarcity, and I know at the ADOT level, they're getting more and more single bids, which is troubling from a competitive standpoint. But the next step down from that is you get no bids. And that'll probably be even a bigger issue for local governments, particularly in the rural parts of the state.
we're seeing that most of our engineer estimates are based upon previous projects and then building in some small inflationary number, but actual bids we're receiving are so much higher because the contractors are very reluctant to put down a number, because by the time they get the equipment, materials, concrete, whatever it is, they could be way above that. So we're even trying to figure out how we might be able to do more requests for proposal, and then use those estimates coming in to then calculate what we're going to go out to bid for.
It's going to be a big issue, and it's one that I think, fortunately, because unlike if you go back 12, 13 years ago when we had that stimulus package, that was 1 year. There's no construction firm that's going to go out there and do a massive investment in equipment and hire folks when there's only 1 year of assured increased funding. But with this sort of guarantees for 5 years, we're hopeful that that'll have a different impact, and hopefully sort of the market will address itself. But as far as right now, it's a big issue, and it's not trending in a good way.
Mr. Barrigo?
Mr. Chair, let's continue the conversation. Kevin, don't go too far. If you want to have a seat, I'm going to continue, and then we may call you back up here a minute to help me out. And again, just want to, you can go past that slide, Allison. Just want to really acknowledge again the efforts that RTAC did this past year, Kevin leading that again, we recognize 90 legislators, but we met with well over a third of them being, again, key leadership positions. I was in most of those meetings, not all of them, but Kevin was in all of those meetings, again, meeting with the key leadership on both sides of the aisle. We started with President Van, ended with President Fan, met with our delegation. And again, Kevin, thank you for all of that. So as we look to this year, go to the next slide. What we've come up with through RTAC is to, again, as Kevin said, let's pursue what we did last year. Lessons learned, went after $50 million in light of a possible, a real significant surplus. We have some options on the table from RTAC standpoint, if you will, they're in our pocket. as this next election happens, as the legislative session rolls out. So what we're looking is three possible options. We asked the state legislator for one-time funding for Greater Arizona outside Phoenix and Tucson for either 100 million, 200 million, or $300 million. And then I put the CYMPO, what CYMPO would receive specifically as it relates to each of those numbers, either 7.7 million, 15.4 million, or 23.1 million. Again, remind the group here that our success was a little over $6 million. So we know that this can be done. Next slide, please. I need to emphasize Kevin's point again, why we're doing this. So look at the Central Yavapai Metropolitan Organization. Where do we fit in the conversation? Number one, we provide the regional leadership to achieve transportation priorities. These next three points are what we do. In that Kevin emphasized that there is a planning process to this. We fully engage the public. We go through these lengthy processes. The CYMPO budget is around $1 million to cover all of our planning process, staff, and the work we do. But the first example is our 25-year regional transportation plan. This is required of CYMPO. We update this every 5 years. We can tell you right now what are the region, the Quad City, the Central Yavapai's priorities, both short-term, mid-term, and long-term. That process took about 15 months, about $250,000 to achieve that document that we use to really come up with our legislative ask today. It's a combination of safety, of data, of our electeds giving input, and the public. The second example, we have a regional transportation safety plan. And the last example is we do every 2 years, we do a 5-year crash data analysis. That last one's a really great example of what CYMPO does. We just did crash data analysis. We spent about $20,000 to do it. Out of that $20,000, we're bringing $4 million of federal money into the region for 4 projects. One of them is a traffic signal at Fair Street and Gale Gardner. One is on Williamson Valley Road for a turn lane. One's possibly in Prescott Valley on Lakeshore. And it's projects like that that CYMPO is able to do. So again, what Kevin said, it's through a process. The public's involved in the data process. Next slide. So here's where we're at today. We have very specific projects that for the last month staff has been working on, and then we have taken this to the technical advisory group. We've basically took our regional transportation plan, which has probably well over 30 to 40 projects for the next 10 years. And we basically attempted to thread the needle that Kevin said. It's about the data, but it's also about the politics. So in working with the technical committee, we acknowledge that if you want us to tell us what the #1 regional project is just based on safety, we can tell you that, but we know this conversation's more than that. So the list that we have before you is we've now narrowed it down to 3 projects. Project A is a local project. We need to acknowledge what Kevin said earlier. When we went in Greater Arizona, went after 36 projects last year, 33 of the 36 projects were local. We hit the landmine with the chair of the Appropriations Committee and Regina Cobb, who would not allow the local projects. She has not run for re-election. She's not there. So again, to Kevin's point, we should be able to at least have the conversation about local projects. So the question here before you is to include local projects or not. What we have is 1 local project and 2 state highway projects. Each of the projects are right around $7 to $10 million. Looking at that first project as an example, the Glassford Hill Road, we have it in our regional transportation plan. It is the highest ranked local project from a regional standpoint, and it would be to widen that road from 4 lanes to 6, or from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. Now, with that said, we have an estimate from our plan 2 years ago of $6.35 million. We all realize the economy that we're talking about and what Kevin talked about. So for the purposes of this conversation, I went ahead and put in a 30% inflation into this. That may or may not cover it, but for the conversation, we went ahead and added $1.91 million to it, bringing that project to a total of around $8.26 million. And then this next point, local match. This is, our legislative body last year, Representative Wynn and others really wanted to see what were the local contributions in this project. So again, to help our conversation out, I went ahead and plugged in a local match, we're calling it, of 10%. So again, that's around $826 million, bringing that project to around $7.43 million. Each of those projects that you see up there have a 30% inflation. Each of them have a local match. The final two projects briefly are on State Highway 89 in the town of Chino Valley, and it would be to widen State Route 89. Basically, project B is from Road 3 North to 4 North, and then project C is 4 North to 5 North. That project C would also include a roundabout at Road 5 North. So with that said, those are the three projects before you. The last part of the conversation, and then I'll open it up to questions and comments on this, is that local match. I've met with all of the TAC members. There has been a TAC meeting. They have approved this list and recommended this list before you. I've also went ahead and had some additional conversations because of that local match. So I have met with Mayor Palguda, the town manager, Gilbert Davidson, to try and get a tentative check-in with that local match. Again, I want to be clear, there's been nothing brought before mayor and council officially, but there was indication that that local contribution could be taken care of by the town of Prescott Valley. The same thing respectively to the town of Chino Valley, and working through Frank Marbury, the public works director, who also talked with the mayor and the town manager. They were also supportive of covering that local contribution, but to be transparent, they also would like to talk further about that with CYMPO, the county, and ADOT to see about, local contribution being more of a regional partnership. So with that said, what the recommendation from staff and the TAC to you as a board is that we lead this year, if we go after that 100 million or $7.7 million for CYMPO, that we go ahead and lead with project A. If the conversation expands and we go for 200 million, then we go with project A and project B. And if we go further than that, we go ahead and go for all three projects. So they are placed in the order. Mr. Chair, at this point, I'll go ahead and pause and take questions and comments from you at this point.
Any questions, comments from Mr. Gallegos? Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Okay, Vinny, I'd like an explanation of why, can you bring those three back up again?
You bet. Allison.
Okay, project A is obviously in Prescott Valley, it's not a problem with that. Project B is just an extension into project C.
Correct.
They're, only a mile apart. So,
They're not even separated. They're next to each other.
right, they're continuous. Why would we not combine them as one? To go forward from there?
Mr. Chair and Supervisor Brown, or Member Brown, great point. So at this point, we would be pursuing, again, we feel comfortable with the 100 million or the $7.7 billion. So if that's the case, it would really only cover one of those two projects, unless the region wants to look at matching that second.
Well, it would seem to me that if we went to project C before project B, we'd be putting the horse before the cart, vice versa.
Correct. And I will say, I will tell you that a couple of years ago when I was in Havasu and Chris Bridges was here, CYMPO did pursue a grant to cover that full stretch. To your point, CYMPO and Bryn was on staff at the time, a $25 million grant to do exactly what you're talking about. Again, we're happy to lead, however, RTAC ultimately makes the ask. If it's 7.7 million, that's all we have to work with, and it would need to be one of two projects. But again, if we go after more, then we can absolutely include both projects.
I just don't wanna, Chino Valley is gonna be involved with this one way or another, and we'll support, the county will support Chino Valley on, helping make these happen. And the question would be is if we went with project C before B, we have a section of road that was 4 lanes going into 2 lanes, going into 4 lanes. You know what I mean, at the roundabouts, between the roundabouts.
Absolutely. Mr. Chair and Supervisor Brown, again, we were now in this position for the last decade of doing segments, but there's a better way to do the segments, so I agree with you.
Well, it's kind of funny because it's kind of what happened on 69, way back when, we started out with 2 lanes going each direction, then we went to 4 lanes. Some of them went to 6 lanes, some of it's now 4 lanes, some of it's down, in spots 2.5, 4.5, whatever it is. And it just seems like, why don't we just do something to end and get it done instead of moving forward. I like the Prescott Valley on Glassford Hill widening because at least it's kind of from beginning to end project. And it's not something in the middle of an existing setting. It'll actually have an impact.
I fully agree. And Mr. Chair, and I did have individual meetings with many of you, and I do want to be clear that on our list, there were higher ranked projects. I just want to be clear, but it goes into the more full conversation. And I'll use one example. The number 1 project that we had on our list was the widening of 89 through the Dells. That was the highest ranked project. The reason why staff isn't bringing that to you today is in talking with Mayor Good and staff, the city is going into a public engagement time about that project over the next year. So we want to be able to give the mayor time and the city time to work through that process. And again, there were other projects higher than these projects, but I want to say when everything came out with regards to local contribution, the politics, local and state, and the data, this is where we ended up. But I do want to acknowledge the greater list. There are other projects that we did consider.
Well, let me ask another question then on top of that, if you don't mind. These are all ADOT projects. These are all, even though they're going through Prescott Valley and or Chino Valley, they are state routes and, highways. So therefore, what is ADOT's participation in this?
Yeah, just for clarification.
Yeah, not that, I'm sorry, but the other 2 I'm talking.
The other 2 are state routes. You are correct, Supervisor Brown, but project A is a local project. Last year, we did have one local project. It was the design of the Sundog connector. When the local projects were not, when they didn't move forward, we lost that funding opportunity. So again, the question for you in light of my update and Kevin's is, do we want to lead with a local project this year? And again, to give me the flexibility that if something changes, we have in our pocket plan B and plan C, if you will.
So Craig, to get to the B and C of your question, I think it was about the funding price instead of throwing it all at one time. Because if we were only gonna go after $100 million, we wouldn't be able to do B and C together.
Well, that's 100 million, but in this case, you're only talking here about 18 million.
Yeah, but out of that 100 million, we're only figuring about 7 million.
Yeah, of the,
100 in reality.
CYMPO would get 7.7 million of the $100 million ask.
So that would be 18 million if we tried to do both those together. That was why it was broke up into 3.
On that slide that's on the screen now, if RTAC's in a position to make the $200 million ask, then Supervisor Brown, we could do two of those projects. But at this point, again, we need the November election to happen. We need the legislative session to open up and know where we're at, but,
Well, also got to consider, the town of Chino Valley, if we've got both of them, that way you cover them to possibly over $3 million. Can they do that? I don't know.
With a little county support, probably, Frank?
I like Frank, I like you when you do bobblehead.
He was trying to hide in the corner, but I saw him sneaking.
and Mr. Chair and Councilmember Armstrong, Supervisor Brown, Frank, again, talked with mayor and town manager. That hasn't come before mayor and council officially, but they did offer their support. Again, the only maybe caveat to that is they would like to include the county and CYMPO and ADOT in that conversation, but they didn't see any issue initially in that conversation, if that's fair.
So is there consensus in regards to project A, B, and C as it's presented?
Yes,
I agree.
yes.
Then with that said, I just have one more slide, Allison, at the end, and we'll wrap it up and you can do your vote as is. Just to make a plug here for the Arizona Rural Transportation Summit, September 14th, next month. It'll be in the city of Maricopa at the Harrah's Auction Casino Resort. I know many of the board members were able to attend last year. I'm pleased to say, as far as I know, the entire board is registered and planning on attending. Most of our TAC members are planning on attending. Right now, the registration's around 150 participants. But I want to make a special invite to, again, Ken Bennett, Selena Bliss, and Representative Wynn to also join us. If I remember from Kevin's last update, I think we were coming up on 15 legislators, 14 that are confirmed to attend. Last year, we had about the same again through Kevin's invitation. So we have a good audience there that we're addressing to let them know. And this is Greater Arizona. This is the 10 MPO and COGs. The MPOs and COGs are hosting this. We're putting this on. So the Sun Corridor MPO and the Council of Central Arizona Governments is the host, and CYMPO's participating in that. And for 2 days, we're going to make the best case we possibly can, to Kevin's point, of why we're doing this, our process. Not all of the other MPO and COGs have their projects approved. We're only the second one in the state with your vote today, if you approve this, to have our list, but everyone's pretty close to it. Kevin, any other plug for the summit? I know you have several panels and guests you have, and I know there's leadership changing, but transportation committees, chairs, and other people, if you want to put a plug in for the summit.
Thank you. I think we've put a great program together on the 14th, the first day, the afternoon. It's going to be more of a federal focus in getting back to that IIJA that passed in November, and in the earlier discussion about we're still with all these new programs that are coming online and the reforms to the existing ones. We're going to have updates from federal highways, Federal Transit Administration. We'll have the Assistant Deputy Secretary of Transportation for Tribal Affairs coming out to talk about the administration's priorities and what we can do to better represent rural America and rural Arizona. But we'll also have some of ADOT's executive team talk about what they're doing to implement the IIJA programs, and that has a big impact on the regions in rural Arizona. So then the second day, we'll shift the focus more to regional and state developments. That's where we'll have most of the interaction with the state legislators, and really an emphasis on what we're attempting to do with this legislation. And I mentioned we're trying to do a better job with getting those COG and MPO recommendations enacted, as well as the inclusion of local projects. And we'll have presentations specifically on both of those 2 points. In fact, Vinny will be one of the presenters on the value of programming. So yeah, I think we put a real good agenda together.
Thank you, Kevin. So with that said, Mr. Chair, any questions or comments, or you can go on to your vote if you want.
I believe we're ready for a motion.
I make a motion to approve the 2023 CYMPO RTAC priority project as presented.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Moving on, item 9, transit planning update. Ms. Stotler.
Good afternoon, Chair Palguda, members of the Executive Board, Brent Stotler, planner with CYMPO. I am here on a return engagement. Some of you know me from my earlier stint with CYMPO, but I spent the last 4 years presenting from this very presentation stand as the Community Development Director for the City of Prescott. Before that, I spent about 8 years in various positions with Yavapai County Development Services and also did federal grant management at the University of Arizona. I'm happy to be here. I'm delighted to be back at CYMPO. It feels like family and coming home. It's been great. With that, I'll give you a brief verbal transit update. Yava Line, the YAV, as they're calling it. Town of Prescott Valley has adjusted their rollout date for their microtransit service, Yava Line, and that date is September 12th of this year. There is an additional agenda item that follows that will address some additions to the work program. So you'll hear a little bit more about Yava Line during that item. Attended last week's YRT board meeting. Rides do remain free until further notice. I think that's probably one of the high points that came out of the meeting, but lots of operational goodness was discussed there. The local coordination committee met on July 19th at New Horizons Disability Empowerment Center in Prescott Valley. The local coordination committee is comprised of human services providers, local folks that are involved in the 5310 program who provide rides to our aging population and our folks with disabilities. That committee meets every other month, and we are endeavoring to have every other meeting throughout the year at one of the service providers' locations so that we can become more familiar with their mission and the way that they do their business. So we're looking forward to the next one. We are coordinating with the Hojoni Foundation, and that will be the November meeting. The next LCC meeting will actually be on September 20th at the Development Services Training Room. And we look forward to having all of our 5310 providers there. On August 8th, the NPO and COG statewide mobility managers group met virtually. We discussed a statewide maintenance forum for rural and urban operators that will be held at the Valley Metro Maintenance Yard in Mesa, and that will happen on October 12th and 13th. And all systems that participate in either 5307, 5310, or 5311 are eligible to participate in that maintenance forum. Yavapai Apache Public Transit made a presentation at our CAC meeting earlier this month. They are intending to expand their routes to Western Yavapai County. They are based currently over in the Verde Valley, and they are, we're actually going on a route planning field trip tomorrow. So I'll have more updates to come on Yavapai Apache Public Transit, but they will be starting to access Western Yavapai County with their transit service. So they will be speaking with us at CYMPO about stops potentially along the 69 corridor in the unincorporated areas, as well as Prescott Valley and potentially Prescott. The VA hospital is one of the stops that they have prioritized. Beyond that, if there are any questions on the transit or mobility management update, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions? Mr. Brown?
I'm just wondering, Tom, you're here from IRT. Have you had any contact with the Apache Nation?
We have not as of now. We are planning on contacting them, however, in the near future.
Okay, good.
CYMPO will be helping with the coordination on that piece as well. So, if there aren't any other questions.
I'm interested in knowing more about that. Reach into Western Yavapai County too. There's a lot of veterans over in that area and they have a tough time getting to the VA, Northern Arizona healthcare system. So
yeah,
I'll be looking forward to updates. Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks,
Mr. Chair.
Moving on, item 10, review, discussion, and possible action to adopt resolution 2022-02 regarding preservation of open space on Gloucester Hill. Ms. Post, I believe you're back up.
Thank you, Allison. On the screen, you will see the resolution 2022-02. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This resolution came as the result and the efforts of the EMAC, our Ecosystem Mitigation Connectivity Advisory Committee. And that is chaired by Tammy DeWitt, City of Prescott, and I am the CYMPO staff liaison. Dan Cherry, who's in the room, is the TAC liaison. So with all the efforts, with all of us, we've put this together for your consideration. EMAC, as a subcommittee of the TAC, doesn't always have a vehicle to be able to express their work and their values. So I'm excited to be bringing this to you today. They are excited to be able to have a voice and share their support for areas that are important to their mission and goals. So as I mentioned, this resolution was initiated by the EMAC, but it is reflective of CYMPO as a whole region. It also allows Dewey Humboldt, Chino Valley, and the rest of the CYMPO planning boundary to show their support for Prescott and Prescott Valley in this effort. Some of the items that you'll see here are broad. They include why open space is important to our nation overall, as well as how it's important to the economy and the health of Arizona, and then, of course, locally, the health and beauty resiliency of our local communities. So we present this to you for your consideration for approval. I do welcome any questions, or if you'd like me to read it out loud, I'm available as well.
I don't think that would be necessary. Or do we have anything from this post? Now I'll entertain a motion to accept it as is.
Make a motion to adopt resolution 2022-02.
Second amendment.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Moving on, item 11, review discussion of possible action to approve the fiscal year 2023 Title VI plan, public involvement plan, and limited English proficiency plan. And I want to thank Ms. Post for her invitation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. What you have in your packets is our updated Title VI plan with our limited English proficiency plan and public involvement plan. We do an annual update to this plan with the help of the ADOT Civil Rights Office. So I have a brief PowerPoint to highlight some of the key points of this plan. The policy statement included in our plan is that CYMPO is committed to ensuring that no person is discriminated against on the grounds of race, color, national origin, or limited English proficiency. And as part of that plan, we follow the acts and federal regulations listed there below in that slide. CYMPO is committed to providing meaningful and inclusive public engagement and involvement opportunities regardless of race, color, or national origin. We will make every effort to provide assistance to those with limited English proficiency and are continually looking for ways to expand and improve public involvement methods. It should be noted that formal complaints can be made by accessing a complaint form that's available on the CYMPO website. Environmental justice is another executive order that's included and that we follow within our Title VI plan. It states that each federal agency shall make achieving environmental justice part of its mission by identifying and addressing as appropriate disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects of its programs, policies, and activities on minority populations and low-income populations. So to summarize, CYMPO will make every effort to ensure transportation investments do not disproportionately burden any population or with adverse impacts. And we'll make every effort to arrange reasonable accessibility to our public meetings for any wishing to participate in the transportation planning process. Limited English proficiency is another area that's addressed in our plan. It describes individuals who speak English less than very well. According to the 2020 census, 3.6% of CYMPO's population are considered limited English proficient. And again, CYMPO will make every effort to provide interpreters or document translation upon reasonable request. Public involvement is another key area of our plan.
Question, Allison. How did they come up with that 3.6% based on the 2020 census?
I believe that's a data point that's collected. We've received that through Maricopa Association of Governments.
So were the residents surveyed and said, check the box if you have limited English proficiency?
That's my understanding, and maybe Vinnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's done through the census process.
Yeah, I believe that's Mr. Chairman and Mayor, but that's one of the census data collection points as to a little bit more breakdown about each household. I don't know that each person gets a survey, but you get as many responses as you can, and then there are some projections within that to give that number.
And how did that number relate to the last census in 2010?
Good question. I don't know that we can look that up. We'll be happy to respond and follow up to you. I don't know that we know that offhand.
Just curious. Because I know we're utilizing resources to support that small percentage, and it'd be interesting to know whether it's growing or declining and what our costs are to provide that. I know there's even a reference to the fact that material can be delivered to individual households so that they have a chance to review some of these issues and be able to provide public input.
And Mayor, we'll be happy to follow up with the response as to how that has changed. I don't know that offhand, but that's a good point that you're making. We'll find out.
We can see.
Excuse me, what happens if we don't adopt this? A lot of people want to ask them, what happens?
Mr. Chair, Supervisor Browning, we can check with our legal counsel. I assume that this is one of the major strings attached to the funding that we receive. There are requirements that we are required to do. So if you were to not approve this, may trigger the bigger questions as to our funding.
Do you agree with that? Yeah.
I personally wouldn't want to find out, but yeah.
Are we really having this conversation? Because this has been up for discussion.
Yeah, this has been an argument for a while back, you know, that if we take federal money, unfortunately, we have to play by federal rules. More than my end. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, public involvement is another area of our plan. It's its own separate plan, and I'll go ahead and read this. It provides opportunity for the public to be involved in all phases of the planning process for providing complete information, timely public notice, opportunities for making comments, full access to key decisions, and early and continuing involvement in developing transportation plans and programs. So while there are a lot of goals in mind behind public involvement, a few key goals would be to create a shared responsibility and ownership for regional transportation and congestion problems, and a shared sense of pride in the development of the solutions to those problems. And then also to provide information and collect input so that decision makers will be able to make the most informed decisions possible. And last slide, just a reminder how CYMPO can collect public comments. Public meetings are, of course, a great way to do that. You can also call the CYMPO office and leave a verbal comment, stop by the CYMPO website and leave a written comment through the contact us page, or mail us a written comment. That concludes my presentation. If anyone has any questions.
Mr. Chairman, if I'm not, would you describe less than very well?
It's a good question. It's its own specific category, and I'm not real clear on the parameters of that, but it's a specific measure that's part of the census data collection process.
Fair enough. If there's no other further questions, Mr. Brown, are you good?
No, thank you.
Okay. Entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve it.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
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 All opposed? Moving on. Item 12, review discussion of possible action to amend the fiscal year 2022-23 Unified Planning Work Program. Statler, welcome back.
Chair Pogbuda, members of the executive board. This item is basically a matter of housekeeping. You are all familiar with our Unified Planning Work Program. It's basically an encapsulating document that compiles all of our active projects and anything that funding might be allocated to. I mentioned that this is connected to the Yellow Line launch, the rollout of the Town of Prescott Valley's microtransit program. Just for purposes of just a little background, the CARES Act funding that was enacted in March of 2020 provided additional funding for transit, public transit projects and public transit systems. That funding was received into the region. The Town of Prescott Valley voted in January of 2021 to pursue the funds in anticipation of launching a microtransit program. Much work and coordination, of course, has occurred since then, too, and including the hiring of a transit development coordinator for the town, whose name is Pedro Rodriguez. And Pedro and I are working together already on a number of items. One of the items was the inclusion of these funds into our Unified Planning Work Program. It is a federal requirement for the designated recipient of these funds to the designated recipient to add the activities related to disbursement of transit funding into the local COG or NPO's work program. And that is the addition of these items. Again, the anticipated launch date for the microtransit system is September the 12th. There are several planning activities that are contemplated under these funds, to and including demand analysis, system expansion planning, safety and security, or PTASP as it's called, and of course the required civil rights policy in place for the use of federal funds. The amounts that are identified within Task 403 as depicted in your packet have been provided to us by the Town of Prescott Valley. CARES Act funding, as a reminder, has 0% local match. And with that, unless Allison has more to add to this item, we're requesting an action by the board today to affirm the addition of these amendments to the Unified Planning Work Program. Be happy to respond to any questions.
Any questions or comments from Ms. Stotler? Hopefully Pedro's holding up his end of the workload, ma'am.
He's been great.
It's good to hear.
Can I make a motion to approve amendment of the fiscal year 2022-2023 CYMPO Unified Planning Work Program as presented?
Have a second? With the second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Moving on to item 13, review, discussion, and possible action to amend the fiscal year 2022-2026 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program.
Mr. Chair. The amendments we're making here are related to the state legislative funding that was awarded through the Art Tech Initiative last session for our projects. Listed here, the State Route 89, 89A eastbound on-ramps and the 69, 169 intersection improvements. We have listed here that the state funding that is being contributed and are working on collecting the contribution from ADOT 169, 169 roundabout that can be added in administratively once the data is available. And then this page here is from the transit section of our MTIP. This information was provided directly from the Town of Prescott Valley. Pedro Rodriguez provided us this information, funding the program for areas specifically vehicle capital, operating, and planning. And again, this is a requirement that it's be included in the CYMPO program. And then lastly, this page here demonstrates the projects discussed earlier for the next session, the next pursuit of funding through the Art Tech Initiative. That concludes the amendment. If anyone has any questions.
Any questions for Ms. McCarthy?
I'd motion to approve the 22-26 CYMPO Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Plan.
All in favor, say aye. Moving on to item 14, ADOT Northwest District Report. We'll be handling this.
Mr. Chair, I believe Andy Roth, I know he's in the meeting. I think, Andy, are you giving the update for Anthony?
And yeah, I'll be giving them today.
Oh, I'm sorry, there you are, Anthony, sorry.
Sir, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Wanted to start off with some construction updates. I'm going to use our project number. So F0429, the I-17 Anthem Way to McGuireville broadband project that is wrapping up. We're finishing some fiber install. Our seating is complete and our conduit's done. And then we also have F0407, which is our SR69 Big Bug Ford to Poland Junction. APNS is working that project. It's a mill and fill surface replacement, spot repair. That project is being hampered by the weather, but it is ongoing. We have a F40409, which is our SR89A Glassford Hill to Coyote Springs Road. That was awarded in April, again for surface treatment replacements. We anticipate to start in late August with some night work. Similarly, we have the other end of that project, F0, or the other end of that road, F0465 SR89, which is from 89 to milepost 322 or Glassford Hills. Paveco Incorporated is the contractor on that. Again, it's a surface replacement, and that's anticipated to start work later this month as well. Again, that's being night work. We also have F0258, which is our I-17 Sunset Point rest area. That was awarded to Hayden, and that is the rehab of the restrooms, vending buildings, and ramadas in the wastewater system. That's approximately an 8-month project. We're hoping to get started September 6th after the holidays, but we're currently building a temporary rest area at the Badger Springs exit to handle some of the overflow for the vehicles. The rest area will be kept open for truck parking, but we're setting up the temporary for the car traffic to use. And then the last one that's moving along is, of course, our Flex Lane project, I-17 Anthem Way to Sunset Point. And we direct you to the website. improving-i17.com to get the latest updates and status on that. Any questions on the current projects before I move on to ones in design?
Yes, sir.
And what was the holdup on the Sunset Rest Area? It was supposed to start and now it is.
It was a last minute decision to build that temporary rest area. So we are waiting till that gets up and running before we close the primary one down so we can get through the holiday traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Again, it's limited to trucks only, correct?
The Sunset Point rest area, it will be limited to trucks only, yes.
All right, nothing else, sir, you can proceed.
As far as what's in design, we have the SR69 Truewood Drive to Stone Ridge Drive, which is a 3-inch mill and replace. We did get the additional budget. I believe Vinny had mentioned earlier. We are at a 95% design submittal, anticipated in the end of this month. And we're looking at a second quarter fiscal year 23 for that. We have the SR69 Prescott Lakes Parkway to Frontier Village, which is the 3rd lane and raised median. We are looking for revised stage 4 submittals in September. It's the second quarter fiscal year 23, anticipated around December 2022 to get that out on the street. The I-17 and SR69 TI will be redoing that deck on 169 over I-17. We're at design review at 100% right now, due this month. We look to be done with that second quarter fiscal year 23. SR169 Grantwood Parkway to I-17, which is a centerline rumble strip project. We're at 60% design. those are due end of this month, and we're looking at a third quarter of fiscal year 23 to get that design wrapped up. Two more to go. We have SR 69 and the 169 roundabout. As Vinny touched on, his district minor project, we did get some additional funding in there, and we're looking at the fourth quarter for that design work. Fiscal year 23, I apologize. And then the last one we have tracking is SR 89, milepost 339 to 369. Again, that is a centerline rumble strip project as well. Design kickoff was this month. And we're looking at a fourth quarter 23, about May, to have that wrapped up. And that's all I have. So I appreciate it again, your time.
Any questions on those comments? Doesn't look like there's any, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on, State Transportation Board report, Mr. Knight.
Thank you. I just got a couple items. These are all going to be on the on Friday's State Transportation Board agenda. There's one item. It's establish a new right-of-way to facilitate the imminent construction and widening and improvement of SR 69 from Prescott Lakes Parkway to Frontier Village. The board will be voting on that. There's also one that maybe Anthony can help me out with. I'm not sure what an economic strength project is, but there's $500,000 economic strength project for the town of Chino Valley in the agenda for Friday. And I'm not sure what an ESP is, but anyway. And then we got one last item on this upcoming agenda. It's Verde Valley Ranch Road at BNSF Paulden Railway Highway Safety Rail Highway Safety Upgrade for $200,000. It's established a new subphase. Construction is railroad work only by BNSF Railway and the Federal Highway Administration, and it's this item is for $200,000, and that's
Last one you're talking about, Gary, that's Verde Ranch Road crossing BNSF rail lines, probably about 2 miles off of 89 to the east.
yeah, that one's it's on our agenda, but it's all for BNSF. It's all.
And we've been going around and around and around BNSF like 4 years, 5 years.
I'm just going on with what's on the agenda. It's right on. I took it right off the agenda. But anyway, and that's really all that's on the agenda. This upcoming agenda on Friday. The State Transportation Board will be meeting on Friday in Gilbert. It will be a hybrid meeting, so you can attend either in person or virtually. And then our next meeting will be in September for the Rural Transportation Summit. It'll be on the 16th. And that's all I've got for the State Transportation Board report.
Any questions for Mr. Knight? Sir, thank you very much. Moving on, item 16, I'll need a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Very well, online.